Do all religions lead to the same place? Boy, of all the people we know, especially in a pluralistic culture, right? We're in a very, very diverse country we live in. There are all kinds of people who believe all kinds of different things, especially about the nature of God. And it's I think, tempting in this kind of world to hope that all roads lead to the same place. Wouldn't that be great if everyone's sincere belief on whatever road they are, whatever religious journey they're on, it would all lead to God? Is that true, though? Do all roads lead to God? Do all religions lead to God? If only it was that easy. Let me give it to you by way of a thought experiment. I think we want to know what's true. Not just any idea will do, especially when it comes to God. All ideas are not created equal. You know, if you were with me and you said, I'm going to make mushroom soup tonight, I really feel like I want to eat mushroom soup. So I noticed before I came into your house, Jim, that there are some mushrooms growing in your front lawn. I'm just going to go pick those mushrooms because, after all, they look a lot like the kinds of mushrooms you see on dinner plates, right? Or in mushroom soup. So you pick a bunch of mushrooms from my lawn and you start making mushroom soup. Now, wait a minute. Now, if those mushrooms are actually toxic, by the way, do you know how to tell if there's toxic mushrooms? I'll just give you a little tip. If there are gills on the bottom of the mushroom, it kills. Gills kill. That's a little extra information free of charge. But if you pick that kind of gilled mushroom and threw it in your mushroom soup, it's going to kill you. All mushrooms do not lead to good mushroom soup. Some mushrooms are actually toxic. And if you put them in your soup, you're going to die from eating that soup. In the same way, all ideas about God, all ideas about the world are not created equally. Some are toxic. They will lead you either to physical or spiritual death. Wouldn't you want to know which of these views is toxic? Wouldn't you want to know which view is true? Wouldn't you want the true mushroom in your mushroom soup? In the end, I think we want to know which view is true and which views are toxic. That's okay. That's the nature of truth. If when I get in a case and I bring someone into trial, that's the suspect who I can demonstrate with evidence is the killer. And that suspect often confesses to the crime after the case. It's not that every single person is equally valid or equally certain that they are the killer. This one, on the basis of evidence, ends up being our bad guy. Well, it turns out we can make an evidential case for Christianity, and we can find out if it's true or false. But if it is true, don't be surprised that it would exclude all the other views. What matters not is how these worldviews feel to you, or how they might, how emotional you might feel about them. What matters more than anything else is which one of those views is true. And that's why we spend time making the case for Christianity. It turns out that every religious view makes a contradictory claim about the way that we are saved or reunited with God, and especially about the nature of Jesus. These are not views that lead to the same place. Instead, these are religious views that hold mutually exclusive notions. So, for example, if you are Jewish, you might believe that Jesus was a preaching rabbi, but you reject the idea that he was God incarnate. Now that means that both of those views, the Christian view and the Jewish view, could both be false, or one of them could be true, but you cannot say reasonably that they're both true because they make contradictory claims. Muslims, for example, would say that Jesus did not rise from the grave. Christians believe he did rise from the grave. One or the two of these could be true, or they both could be false, but you could not reasonably say that both are true because, again, they make contradictory claims. What each view says about Jesus matters. Because if the Christian claim is true, and Jesus rose from the grave, he did something that no other religious leader has ever done. Buddha did not come back from the grave. Muhammad did not come back from the grave. It turns out the thing that Jesus did, the resurrection, is what defines Christianity historically. The fact that it's locked into an event that occurred in the distant past called the resurrection, and it changes the nature of Jesus. Jesus is the only way to God because Jesus alone is God. His claims of deity were demonstrated by the resurrection. That's a very different path than the other paths. And it contradicts the claims of the other roads that don't lead to the same place because they make mutually exclusive claims. That's why it's so important for us to get this one right. Which of these roads you're on, they'll all take you to different places. But if you want to be reunited with God, there is a way It is to follow Jesus of Nazareth, who came, rose from the grave, and proved he was God. Do atheists believe in just one less God than Christians? I was looking through some web pages online and really kind of looking at the comment section. If you've ever looked at the comment section on a blog post, that seems to be where all the action is, right? So someone writes a blog post, and then you have 100 people underneath the blog post in the comment section that are basically just kind of like, a hammer looking for a nail, right? They're just beating each other up in the comment section. That's not unusual today. And sure enough, I heard someone make a complaint, which I've heard so many times before, this idea that, hey, you know what? I, as an atheist, this gentleman was saying, I reject all the gods of mythology. You and I are so much alike. We're actually both atheists, you, Mr. Christian, and me, Mr. Atheist, because we both reject all the gods. The only difference between you and me is I reject one more than you do. And I reject all those gods for the same reason that you reject those gods, but I just reject your God for the same reason you reject Zeus and Attis and Adonis and all the other gods that preceded Jesus. Is that true? Are we just like atheists, but we just, haven't rejected the last God? I think that might make sense if the entire palette of potential gods in history were all equally attested. Or in other words, if there was the same amount of evidence that demonstrated that all those gods exist, the same amount of evidence that we have that demonstrates that Christianity is true, if they were equally evidentially viable, then I think it would make sense that why are we holding on to something that no, that's not the case at all. It turns out that the level of evidence that you might present to make a case for any god of history, of Cyrus, you name it, compared to Jesus, there is no comparison to the amount of manuscript evidence, to the early dating of that manuscript evidence, to the way that evidence was written down and maintained and transmitted over the centuries. A lot of these gods you were talking about in antiquity were not even based on any historical events that you could even test or even find evidence for. The case for Christianity is very different than the case for Marduk or for Mithra or for, you name that god that came before Jesus. The case that you could make for those gods is so much less, so inferior to the case you could make for Christianity. You cannot compare these apples and oranges. They are not the same kinds of claims. But let me give you one more way to think about this. Imagine that we are in a criminal case together, in a trial together, and I've presented 6 weeks of evidence that demonstrates that this defendant is the suspect, the killer in our case. And in the closing argument, the defense attorney stands up and he says to you, look, the prosecutor and I agree that every other potential suspect in the world is not guilty of this crime, did not commit this crime. I'm just like the prosecutor, but I have rejected one more potential suspect than the prosecutor has. We are both people who think that there are no suspects in this case. I've just rejected one more. He accepts this as the suspect. This is stupid. Think about this for a second. Is there good evidence that demonstrates that's the suspect or not, okay? Whether there's no good evidence or whether you've rejected other potential suspects does not say anything about whether he's the suspect in the case. The only thing that describes him as the suspect is the evidence you're offering to support his case, the case against him. Either we have a case against him or we don't. But an idea that if you don't think anybody else did this murder, so why should we think he did it? Who makes that kind of a case? The issue really is, do you have enough evidence to demonstrate that he did it? When it comes to Christianity, the evidence is there. We have to make the decision. Is there enough evidence to demonstrate that Christianity is true? It matters not how many other possibilities there are. What matters is, what's the evidence for those? What's the evidence for this? There's a reason why that guy is the defendant in this case, because the evidence pointed him from the beginning. There's a reason why Christianity is still on the table, although all those other gods are no longer worshipped, because the evidence is on the table. There's good reason to believe that Christianity is true. We haven't just rejected one less God. We've found the one who is God.